The good, the bad, and the ugly. In the past 2 decades, we've seen some really beautiful motorcycles that tick all the right boxes with their tech, designs, and of course, engine abilities. But how about those bikes that felt like hell with their awful performances and less than adequate engines? Today, we'll be exploring some of the worst motorcycles of the 2000s. Make sure you stay to the end to see what Harley model made the list. Hit the subscribe button if you're liking the content and want to see more. In 2005, Hyosung, a South Korean company known for making components for big-name brands, decided to make a bike of their own, the GT650R. They designed it to be seemingly efficient and, of course, affordable for everyone. On paper, it seemed like a beat choice, with a 647cc DOHC 8-valve 90-degree V-twin engine that could easily pump 79 horsepower and 43 pounds of torque. While it sounded promising, things didn't exactly go as hoped. The GT650R had quite a number of issues, most common being the electrical problems with the stator and rectifier. Imagine you finally get to take out your brand new bike, then it just goes dead partway through the ride. You try to fire the ignition over and over, but the bike doesn't come alive. This was the reality for many owners of the GT650R. The transmission was an animal on its own. The gear shifting felt clunky, and some riders reported the bike popping out of gear completely. The bike's performance was nothing to write home about either. It struggled at higher speeds, and riders noticed power inconsistencies when driving above 80 miles per hour. Each time you hit the road, it really was a gamble with reliability. While the GT650R was slightly cheaper than its competitors, like the Suzuki SV650, it still couldn't stand a chance against any of them. It felt like Hyosung couldn't quite bring all the pieces together to make the perfect bike, and by 2016, the company left the motorcycle market. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more bike reviews of the yesteryears. Now back to the worst motorcycles of the 2000s. In 2001, BMW took a left turn with the R1200C. They made a cruiser that was very different from their usual sports bikes. This bike was powered by a 1,170cc air-cooled flat-twin boxer engine, and it produced just about 61 horsepower. You might not see this as an issue, but for a bike that weighed about 560 pounds, that was a bit underwhelming. Even with acceleration, the R1200C was like a snail on the highway. The gearbox was also a mess. It was criticized by many for its clunky shifting. Some owners found that the engine had surging problems. That is, they had to get really precise with the tuning or rely on aftermarket solutions. Plus, the timing chain tensioner was a huge failure often, even as a brand new bike. As for its design, well, that was something else. The R1200C's look was unique. Maybe too unique for some. BMW wanted to break into the cruiser market, but instead of breaking into the market, they ended up breaking their customers' hearts with the bike's poor aesthetics. If this bike broke your heart, then the 2008 Suzuki Be King is going to break it into even smaller pieces. Back in 2008, Suzuki rolled out their Be King, a naked sport bike that seemed to share genes with the legendary Hayabusa. With a 1340cc inline-4 engine pushing out around 181 horsepower and 146 pounds of torque, it really seemed to be a record breaker. However, when it hit the streets, the only thing it broke were the hearts of its owners. One of the biggest disappointments was how far the production bike strayed from the original 2001 concept. That prototype actually had some wild promises: a supercharged engine producing 250 horsepower, fingerprint recognition for ignition, and a futuristic heads-up display built into a custom helmet. When it was launched, though, none of these high-tech features made the cut. Instead, we got a fairly conventional naked bike. Taller riders often found their knees bumping against the plastic side panels, which proved to be extremely uncomfortable. And the weight problem? The bike was just too heavy. On a fair note, its engine was solid, but it wasn't exactly reliable. Owners reported issues with the exhaust valve seizing up, which triggered a C46 error code. Fuel consumption was another drawback. I mean, why couple a modest-sized fuel tank with a super thirsty engine? We may never know why Suzuki made this bike, but one thing is for sure, it was a flop amongst riders. Next on the list of worst motorcycles is the 2009 Honda DN01. Honda introduced the DN01 in 2009. It was a bike that was, well, hard to define. It wasn't exactly a cruiser, not really a sport bike, nor was it a scooter either. It seemed like Honda took bits and pieces from all three and threw them into a blender to make something entirely new. But was it really innovative? The DN01 used a 680cc liquid-cooled V-twin engine that gave it 61 horsepower and 47 pounds of torque. What really stood out, though, was the human-friendly transmission, or HFT. This was an automatic transmission, no gear shifts or clutch needed, just smooth acceleration. Despite all these, though, the DN01 didn't exactly win everyone over. One of the first things people noticed was its weight. It was a really heavy 595-pound motorcycle. It also had a low ground clearance, which meant you'd scrape the footboards pretty easily, and it got worse if you were trying to lean into a turn. The riding position was feet forward, and the seat height was a low 27.2 inches. On paper, this should have made the DN01 super comfortable, but then you hit a bumpy road and the soft rear suspension buries that comfort. Not exactly what you want for a relaxing ride, right? On performance, the engine was fine for city riding or cruising at moderate speeds. But with that weight, the power just wasn't enough. Acceleration was way below what was needed, and the top speed was only around 110 miles per hour. When you compare this to its price tag of around $15,000 back in 2009, you'd understand why it landed on our list of worst motorcycles. Still around and enjoying our content? Don't forget to subscribe for more. If the price of that last bike surprised you, just wait till you hear about the 2000 Norton Nemesis. Designed by British engineer Al Melling, the Norton Nemesis, released in 2000, packed a 1,479cc V8 engine with a promise of producing around 235 horsepower and 110 pound-feet of torque. It was every motorcyclist's dream bike, especially with its 6-speed transmission and 478-pound dry weight. Norton motorcycles were definitely onto something when they built it. Sadly, all the ambitions the Nemesis bike had promised went down the drain. For starters, the design choices were just unconventional, to say the least. Rim-mounted brakes, a push-button semi-automatic gearbox, these were features that did more of raising eyebrows than reassuring riders. Oh, and there was the engineering itself. While the V8 engine and semi-automatic transmission seemed super cool, they also raised big questions about reliability and durability. According to some, the Nemesis tech didn't go through enough testing and was just pushed out for production. Things only got messier outside the workshop. Legal disputes over the Norton name created a bit of a brawl, and so Al Melling eventually parted ways with them. He tried to rebrand the bike as the Melling Nemesis, but it didn't help much or even gain any traction. Production never really took off, and while there were claims that a handful of units might have been sold, it's hard to pin down the exact numbers. And with the $75,000 price tag, no, there weren't many sales. So if you think $14,000 was outrageous for a 2009 bike, you'll definitely have dropped your jaw when you heard about the $75,000 price of the Nemesis. But is that the last terrible bike of the 2000s? Definitely not. We have a couple more to discuss. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you like what you see. Kawasaki launched their cruiser motorcycle, the Vulcan 2000, in 2004, hoping that its massive 2053cc V-twin engine could turn the whole motorcycle market upside down. At the time, this made it the largest production V-twin on the market, offering about 116 horsepower and 141 pound-feet of torque to the bike. But here's the thing, while it was undeniably impressive with its numbers, the Vulcan 2000 had its quirks. They couldn't be ignored. The bike was heavy, and when fully fueled, it was shy of around 820 pounds. With this, even getting it off the side stand could feel like a workout. The engine also had its own deal of troubles. It had a low redline of just 5,250 RPM, so you had to upshift often to avoid hitting the rev limiter. The clutch was another story. It was so heavy that long rides could leave your hands in pain. Then there were the early mechanical hiccups. The 2004 model had a shorter kickstand, which made parking and uprighting the bike really difficult. The rear sprocket hub initially had single bearings, which proved to be a weak point. Kawasaki later upgraded this to twin bearings in 2006, but by then the bike had already earned a bad reputation for its early problems. By 2010, Kawasaki pulled the plug on the model. Now, the last on today's list of the worst motorcycles of the 2000s is the 2008 Harley-Davidson XR1200. In 2008, Harley-Davidson decided to try something a little different with the XR1200. Inspired by the legendary XR750 flat tracker, this bike was able to produce just about 90 horsepower using a 1200cc air-cooled V-twin engine. Yeah, the power seemed like a twist on Harley's usual formula. Unfortunately, the XR1200 didn't exactly sell as Harley probably hoped. For a bike aiming to play in the sporty naked segment, its 580-pound weight told an entirely different story. It made the bike pretty sluggish, which wouldn't be the best when you're competing against lighter, nimbler bikes. The engine had decent grunt too, but compared to rivals in the same category, it was kind of a disappointment. The design was another pain for buyers. Harley tried to channel it to make it look like the XR750, but some felt the homage didn't hit the mark. Instead of the raw, no-nonsense vibe of the flat tracker, the XR1200 came off as more of a watered-down copy. It wasn't bad looking, no, but it didn't have the kind of excitement you'd expect from something that should be as gorgeous as the XR750. Then there was the question on reliability. Some owners reported electrical issues, like problems with the fuel pump priming or the bike struggling to start. The theft protection system also wasn't the best, sometimes acting up and leaving riders stranded. And to top it off, the build quality wasn't quite up to par. Things like bolts and nuts didn't hold up well to moisture, leading to rust. For a bike with Harley's price, it was a tough pill to swallow, and sales reflected it. Traditional Harley fans didn't exactly hop on the sportier design, while riders who might have been interested in something new were bothered by the weight, the price, and the fact that it didn't measure well against other bikes in the segment. In the end, the XR1200 just couldn't find its place, and its production was discontinued after a short run. Well, that's a wrap for today's video here at Yestermoto. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to stay updated with all our upcoming content. Let us know in the comments if you agree or disagree with the list. Let us know if you think another bike should have been listed. We'll catch you in the next one.